Thank you so much. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I think this is cutting out, no? Yeah, let me try this one. Okay, yeah. So, just a clarification. This is not a stopover. So I was in Cincinnati and we are flying out of Detroit. But actually my primary intention was to actually visit Sister Hamidi and her family, because the work that she's been doing, I've only been observing it kind of from a distance. We've only barely had any direct interactions with each other. But the kind of work that she's done to further the service that Bayna and myself have been trying to provide to help people around the world just appreciate the Quran better, it's pretty remarkable. And inshallah ta'ala, it's an inspiration not just for getting this work translated into Arabic, which has been going on because of her incredible support, but also in other languages around the world, inshallah ta'ala. So a special dua for her and her family. May Allah accept that effort. So I was, I'll be honest with you, this afternoon when I met with some of the community members and had a really nice lunch with them and the family, I kind of threw out the question, so what am I talking about tonight? And I don't know, I thought you knew. So I've been thinking about what to talk to you folks about tonight, and there are some things that are on my mind. There's a lot of stuff, of course, you can find me on YouTube easily and go to sleep listening to me. Many of you already do that. But I wanted to talk about some of the things that I haven't had a chance to talk about that are on my mind, especially given the climate that we're living in. I think there's some very, very serious discussions that need to be had, that we all need to be thinking about as Muslims living in this country. And what is going on and how the landscape in this country is changing. Those of us that have lived in the United States or were raised in the United States or have been here for 2 decades or more know that there's something changing in the air. And there are changes that have happened in the US politically, culturally, over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's actually accelerating now because of what's happening in Gaza. It's accelerating now at a pace that's kind of unimagined before. Like, you couldn't imagine the kinds of conversations that are happening now, happening 10 years ago. It was inconceivable. It was impossible to think. And though we think all of that is just political, like all of those conversations have to do with geopolitics, they have to do with American foreign policy, they have to do with corruption in the government, they have to do with AIPAC and all these other kinds of things. There's a political side to that. But there's actually, when I look at it, I'm not a political scientist, even though it's one of the subjects that I love. I do consider myself a serious student of the Quran. And in the Quran, Allah has something that our scholars call sunan ilahiyya. Like, Allah has a pattern in how He does things, right? There's a system Allah made for how a tree grows. There's a system Allah made for how a baby grows. The same way, there's a system Allah made for how nations grow, and how nations age, and how nations fall. Like, there's a system He's made, and it's been in place since the beginning. And He keeps reminding us that He has this system in place with the stories that He tells in the Quran. He does that over and over and over again. So I just want to make a couple of preliminary points that I think everybody should be aware of. So our starting point is the same, and I'll get to what I really want to talk to you about. The first thing is that Allah has His sunnah for how He deals with rebellious nations if they have a prophet among them. Number one, that's really important. So, you may have known that, even kids know that the nation of Nuh alayhi salam got flooded, or the nation of Salih got destroyed, or the nation of Hud got destroyed, or Fir'aun got destroyed, etc., etc., etc. You've heard these stories before, right? But what is not commonly understood is we sort of look at those stories and we say, okay, well, that's what's going to happen again if a nation disbelieves. It's not that simple. Because the idea of nations being punished in this life, like all of them being punished, that would happen when a messenger was among them, and he's the living miracle of God also, and he's showing them Allah's signs. Like in the case of Salih alayhi salam, it was a she-camel, right? In the case of Musa alayhi salam, it was the 9 signs shown to the Pharaoh. So these miracles are demonstrated by the prophets. There's no excuse left for people to be disbelievers. There's no excuse left. And they've been given every opportunity to turn around, and Allah then makes a verdict on those nations in His wisdom, essentially suggesting that there's no one left in that nation that is going to believe. And He makes that explicitly clear in places like Surah Al-Dhariyat, وَأَخْرَجْنَا مَنْ كَانَ فِيهَا مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. So like, or مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So there was nobody left that was believing except that they were taken out. So there's only the worst of disbelievers left. And here it's also important to note the difference between someone who doesn't believe the religion of Islam and a kafir. And that's an important distinction to make also. A kafir in the Quran is not the same as a non-Muslim. I know that's very commonly, we use the word just to refer to non-Muslims. But the Quran actually takes a much more complex view on the subject. It distinguishes between the people of the book, the people who don't know any better, قَوْمٌ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ, people that are unaware, people that commit shirk, and the kuffar. There are multiple categories of people. It would be nice and oversimplistic to say every time Allah is talking about non-Muslims, He's talking about kuffar, but He's not. Just like humanity is not simple and straightforward, no one person is one way. There's a complexity inside each human being. There are also complexities inside nations. And there are also complexities inside non-Muslims. Just like there are complexities within Muslims. So Allah talks about different groups of people in different ways. And the worst of them, He actually calls kuffar. He's not just using the word, if you study the Quran end to end carefully, and you look at where kufr occurs, disbelief, what we call commonly disbelief, you will find it in places where basically these are the most wretched of people. These are the worst of people. And that's when Allah's punishment comes down. Now, the next important piece of this equation is that Allah has a different sunnah for believing nations. So those were the disbelieving nations. He's so excited to see me. That's what. Don't you just hold him? I can just hold him. I think he heard me say that. I should. Yeah, the thing is, he sees me, he gets excited, and the thing then is I get excited, and then it's complicated. So, anyways, what was I saying? Something about Islam? The sunnah of believing nations. Okay, the sunnah of disbelieving nations, prophets come, and by the way, the other important side note here, for a lot of people, there's a confusion, especially when we teach kids at Sunday school, Saturday school, etc. We teach the story of these prophets, one after the other, and there's a pattern. Prophet came, people died. Prophet came, people died. Prophet came, people died. And in the kid's mind, it's pretty much what prophets do. Which one was Nuh alayhi salam? Was that the tsunami, or was that the fire? Like, we're just associating prophets with mass death, right? So let's step back and understand that a little bit better. The idea is that, I'll give you an analogy. If a person doesn't take care of their health, they don't eat right, they don't move around, they don't exercise, they're eating poisonous things, eventually their body is going to have a response that's going to kill them, right? And a person's getting terminally ill. And then a doctor comes along finally and says, listen, if you don't change this behavior, you're going to die. This is the way nature works. You can't fight it, right? So the idea of prophets coming was when nations were heading down a path where they were just going to get destroyed anyway. And Allah then tries to save those nations by intervening by way of prophets and saying, hey, you're doing these messed up things. This is going to get you destroyed. And you're not the first one. You can't escape, just like you can't escape nature or the universals of health. The same way you can't escape the universals of spiritual health or moral health. It's the same. Just like when you don't take care of your body, there are consequences. When you don't take care of your soul, there are consequences. That's just the way Allah made this world. So the prophets come right as people are about to become terminally ill, and if they don't change course, they're going to collapse. And then a few people change course, and most people say, no, nothing's going to happen. We're different, we're special. Yeah, it used to happen to people before, or maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but we're number one. Nothing's ever going to happen to us. And every nation that ever got destroyed thought of themselves as number one, beyond the downfall. And that's the attitude that they showed prophets one after the other, right? So the idea that we should associate prophets with destruction is false. It's the nations that should be associated with destruction. not the prophets. The prophets should be associated with trying to save them from themselves, actually. To save them from themselves. Okay, so now past that side note, let's talk about Muslim nations. The model, the case study in the Quran for a Muslim nation that also failed. So it's disbelievers that fail, but a Muslim nation that also failed, that would be Bani Israel. That would be the Israelites. Okay, so and it's detailed in the Quran. And the reason that was given to us is because from now on, this is the final prophet. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the final prophet, which means no more prophets are coming, which means no more nations are getting the final warning, which means no more nations are going to go extinct. That era is over. There's no more that a nation is going to get wiped out by Allah because they rejected a prophet, because the prophet would have to be among them for that to happen. That's never going to happen again. But there is a sunnah of Allah that Muslims should especially pay close attention to from here on out. And that is when people who believe act like they don't want to obey Allah. There's a sunnah for them too. And that was especially important for Muslims to hear because Muslims were the last nation that believe in a prophet. We're the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if we start failing in our responsibilities to Allah, then there are going to be consequences too. There are going to be consequences too. However, the consequences for us are not the same as the consequences of disbelieving nations and all of that. It's a different sunnah of Allah. And again, let me quiz you now. Which nation did Allah describe in detail so we understand that sunnah of Allah? That would be the Israelites. That would be Banu Israel. What exactly did they do and what consequences did they suffer? That's in great detail. And so what the Muslim nation should be doing, in whatever century they find themselves, is they should be a very particular part of our education should be a careful study of the Israelites in the Quran and all the things they did wrong. But while we're studying it, we should have a giant mirror in front of us and saying, hey, this is what they're doing wrong. Is any of that in our behavior? And this is what they did next. And is any of that in our behavior? And we should just kind of itemize, these are the red flags. If these occur in our behavior, then Allah also describes not only what they did wrong, what consequences did they suffer because of what they did wrong, right? So Allah will describe that also in great detail, okay? So like, ضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ الذِّلَّةُ أَيْنَمَا ثُقِفُوا, for example. That powerlessness, humiliation was poured on them, slapped on them, wherever they went, wherever they were found. They became a people of a diaspora. They were spread out all over the world. They became minorities in different communities where they started assimilating with them because they were too humiliated to be themselves, so they had to act like the dominant nations in which they were living as immigrants. That doesn't sound familiar at all, does it? Right? People were insecure about who they were as believers, and they were living in a larger, much more powerful, non-believing society, which looked down on them as these weak, pathetic minorities. So they thought that it would be the most successful thing for them to act more and more like the disbelieving majority and look like them, act like them, talk like them, embody their behaviors, because then they will be seen as one of them and that will be their path forward to success. So that's a version of assimilation. Now on that note, because I don't want to just talk about the ancient Israelites, I want to tell you something about American assimilation versus European assimilation. Because I've spent quite a bit of time in Europe now, and I've observed what happens in Europe, and we are in heaven compared to what's happening in Europe, what's been happening in Europe. This is like, when I land back in the USA, as bad as things are here, I can feel the freedom entering my lungs, as opposed to when I'm in Europe. So I'll just to give you like some idea. So in France, for instance, for a long time they had regular, medical schools been around in European nations, especially Central European nations. And when the Muslims started, populating France in immigration in large numbers, particularly Algerians and Moroccans, etc., all the places that France ravaged and killed. There's all the people where they committed mass murder. All of a sudden, those people are immigrants in France, but now these are the people that are making France dirty. These are the pollutants of France, right? So what do they do and our girls, our boys and girls, they're brilliant. Especially our daughters, they're brilliant, right? So I'm in Belgium, and a neighboring country, I was doing a program. A bunch of young ladies, medical school students, came from France to attend my program, and we had a discussion afterwards. And what are they telling me? Yeah, they issued a new policy. If you're going to do any kind of medical practice, rotations, your internship at a hospital, anything in medical school, you have to wear sleeveless tops. Now, what do your armpits have to do with surgery? I don't understand, but but you know what? That's like it's not even subtle. Like it's very directly targeted at. We don't want these. Either you choose your religion, or you choose your education. You have to make a choice. You're going to have to make a choice, right? You're going to find across universities in the United States, in the thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not even more. Young women that are in PhD programs in engineering, medicine, neuroscience, political science, and some of them are professors, and they're wearing their hijab, and they're teaching it. That is next to impossible in Europe. It's next to impossible in Europe. And they call themselves secular societies, right? So let me tell you, American secularism is not the same as European secularism. They are two very different things. American secularism is, you want to worship the devil? Go ahead. You want to worship Allah? Go ahead. You want to worship no God? Go ahead. You want to set up an atheist church? I don't even know what that means, but go ahead, right? You want to be a man, a giraffe, like whatever you want to be, just do it, just do it, okay? Just pay your taxes, okay? Just let the IRS take your money, then you do whatever you want, like that. But there's another rule. There's another little bit of a rule in America, and that is, whatever you are, you can't stop somebody else from being what they are. Live and let live. Okay, be and let be. That's their policy. Not in Europe, with the exception of England, which is now starting to change too. In Europe, it's not live and let live. If you want to be French, then you have to look French and you have to act French when you're in public. You want to worship your God? Go do it in your bedroom, in your living room. Don't bring that out on the street. Don't bring that to the grocery store. Don't bring that to the mall. Don't bring that to the job. Don't bring that to the university. Keep that at home. We don't want to see any sign of anybody's religion. They say any sign of anybody's religion, but they really just mean Muslims. And then, there was a big thing with the niqab ban. Doesn't matter where you stand on what the evidence is for niqab, but many Muslims wear niqab. They, veil their faces. And then Allah brought COVID, and everybody in France was wearing niqab. Right? So that is the kind of secularism they face. And so, you know what's happened there? The Muslims, there was an attempt to ghettoize the Muslims. So the Muslims, generally, they hate the system hates us, we hate it back, right? And a lot of young men, they end up in crime. Muslim men, they end up in crime. Only more recently, in the last couple of maybe 15 years or so, the youth of Central Europe especially, they've become more concerned with entrepreneurship and building their own business enterprises and kind of building themselves up a little bit, right? And that's been there. Our story is completely different from that. Our story is completely, in fact, when you go to Europe and speak with or visit Muslim communities, it sounds like the Muslim communities in America in the maybe 80s and 90s, maybe, at best. We were just starting to build infrastructure, right? Many of the young people here don't remember a time when we didn't have mega Islamic centers. They don't remember, they don't know what that is. They don't know an American life where you have to drive 4 hours to find a halal grocery place or pray Jumu'ah and then road trip back every weekend. They don't know what that is. But that is the reality of the American story. Many of you actually remember that time in America too, right? Now, coming back to what I was saying. When Muslims came to this country, many Muslims came here from the Arab world. Many Muslims came here from South Asia. Many Muslims came here from Africa. All these different places in the world. And many of those places were, unfortunately, riddled with corruption. So even if you got a degree in some country, I'm not going to name countries because you're like, why do you name this country? So if you got your degree and you got your PhD and you got your medical license, then some rich guy or some village leader, his son, bought that same degree and now is your boss. or got the job instead of you. And that's normal. That's normal in many, many parts of the Muslim world. So there's this frustration that I'm doing this hard work, I'm trying to get this education, but I can't, reap the fruits of my labor. I can't do it. And if you want to start a business, if you just want to start a restaurant or start anything, then there are people that come and say, where's my cut? And they're not the government. And if you don't give my cut, then you're going to get cut. And so a lot of people left that unfair setup and said, I think we can do better for our family. And they migrated. And early on in the 90s, they were guilted for migrating for the sake of dunya. If you were here in the 90s, the conversation in khutbahs used to be, you have to do da'wah, because if you came to America for the sake of dunya, then there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, whoever made hijrah for dunya, then فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ. This is bad. You need to do da'wah, otherwise your existence here is not justified. It's not justified. My problem with that entire philosophy is that philosophy is found nowhere in Allah's book, nor is that the right understanding of that hadith. Also, the Quran itself says, وَآيَةٌ لَهُمْ أَنَّا حَمَلْنَا ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ فِي الْفُلْكِ الْمَشْحُونِ. That is a miraculous sign for them that we board their children, they board their kids onto filled ships, vessels. In the ancient world, why did people put their young men and young sons and daughters onto vessels, large ships? Why? For a vacation? They were sending them to the new world. They were sending them to set up their life somewhere better where they can live freely, get away from war, get away from famine, find a new opportunity for themselves. And it's not like they can get on a ship and then next weekend come back, yeah, the weather was too hot. No. You're gonna go there, you're gonna be on the ship for 4, 5, 6 months. I don't know how long you're gonna be out at sea. And you're gonna end up somewhere. You're gonna build a life and you may never come back. And that's actually how human civilization flourished. That's how it was developed. In fact, most places where Islam spread, it's spread by way of trade. That's a historical fact. We spread Islam by trade. We did business with people, and then the way we did business spoke loudly for Islam. That's what ended up being the case. It just spoke so loudly for Islam that people started accepting this religion. But anyway, now things are reversed. I just want to make one quick comment about the Israelites and ourselves on this, because there's so much to talk about, so much to unpack in this. But some things I really want to just implant in your minds. In Spain, in Andalusian Spain, Muslims were at their intellectual peak. Okay? So what was happening in Andalusian Spain? There were Jewish scholars because the Hebrew language was killed. And they were reviving the Hebrew language using the rules of Arabic grammar in Andalusia, Spain. They have their, we have like our tajweed heritage and our qira'ah heritage. They were restoring their melodious recitation of the Torah, borrowing rules from the tajweed scholars. This is what was happening in Andalusia, Spain. Christians, Jews, scholars, atheists, scientists, medical practitioners, musicians, philosophers were all converging in this place called Andalusia, Spain. It was this university. It was a giant university for the world. And this is what the Muslims were creating. And many of the books that were being burned in Europe because they're considered blasphemous were actually, not only were the Muslims learning the Greek language, Latin language, and other languages, they were translating Plato, Aristotle, and all those works that were being burned by the church. They were getting translated by the Muslims and being taught and studied in Andalusia, Spain. And the Europeans were in their dark ages. And the Europeans realized something. We're not going to survive this. We're going backwards. And if you traveled then, at that time, if you had a time machine and you traveled back then to Andalus or something, and then you traveled to England, right? Just as an example, because this is pre-American time, so let's travel to England, right? You would see the Brits, the English didn't have a sanitation system. They didn't know what to do with the horse manure and the people relieving themselves, and diseases were spreading in the streets. And when you traveled to Andalus, there was an incredible infrastructure, clean street. Like you just came from the third world to the first world. That's what was happening. A great scholar that lives near you guys in Detroit, Dr. Zulfiqar Ali Shah. He's the director of the Islamic Association of Greater Detroit. He's actually written a book, Islam and the English Enlightenment. Worth getting. Every college student here should have it. He's probably going to write another one on the American Enlightenment too. Islam and the American Enlightenment. But just on the English Enlightenment. People think that India got colonized by the British because they were under the Mughals, right? The Muslim rulers. But they got colonized by the British because they sneaked in by way of trade and snuck in weapons and all this stuff. The East India Company, that story. What's not recorded or what's not popularized is a lot of young men in England, Europeans, frustrated with the way the world was, saw that the Muslim empire was actually flourishing in science and trade and engineering and architecture and everything. And they were flooding there to learn. And hundreds of thousands of them were actually becoming Muslims. That's what was happening. Now, the nation that leads the way in education leads the world. And they lead the way in technology, they end up leading the world. That's just the history of the world, right? Now, what happened in America in the last century? We led the way. The Americans led the way. And the world got attracted to this place. The best minds, or even if not the best minds, anybody who had an opportunity to get a visa, even if they got an opportunity to get a visit visa, a tourist visa, they didn't see it as a tourist visa, did they? This was permanent residence. We got the tour. This is Khalidiyan Fiha somehow. We'll make it happen. We're gonna figure it out. Something's gonna happen. Whatever your story may be, whatever your family story may be, you ended up here. When they ended up here, some like myself, I come from Pakistan. Some Pakistani guy came from Sialkot, some town in Pakistan, or some village in Pakistan, and he sees street lights and highways with clear lines on them and the shiny things on the bottom. You're like, oh, their streets have diamonds on them. Look at their buildings. And they're looking, I was like, wow, this is a new world. What is this place? We're mesmerized. And when you're so mesmerized, you're like, well, our people are so backwards and so dirty and so corrupt and so behind. And these people are so forwards and they're so professional and they're so kind and they're so principled and nobody's taking bribes and nobody, at least not in public, right? But nobody's taking bribes and nobody, I can go to a restaurant and there's a line, I go to a donut place and get in line and nobody's going to cut the line because they come from an elite family. That's never going to happen here, but it's normal. Else, they're like, these people are a lot better. I should be more like them. I should be more like them. And if they're so much better, then okay, then a little bit of beer, a little bit of clubbing here and there, so what's the problem? I mean, if this is so bad, then well, how come they're so good in everything else? And when you look at the Muslims, okay, yeah, they make salah, and they have beards and stuff, and they have hijab, but look at how they treat their families, look at how their streets look at how their homes look at this, look at their society, look at their government, look at this. And all of a sudden, the Muslim that comes here is mesmerized by this glamorous, developed Europe and America. It's the glamour of it, right? And we're bedazzled by it. This was the 90s story. This was the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s story. In fact, this even happened in Mexico. Mexico was at a development peak in the 70s. They were developing infrastructure, engineering, and they had a need for engineers. And they brought in some between 20 to 50,000 engineers from Morocco and Lebanon and Syria. They brought so many young men that were studying engineering came to Mexico. And it was 2012 when I went to Mexico City. And when I got there, one of my most important companions in life was the Zabiha Halal restaurant app. Right, so I landed in Mexico City. First thing I went to is, where's the halal food, bro? And I found two restaurants, a Moroccan place, a Pakistani place. And the Moroccan place was 20 miles closer. So I went to the Moroccan place. Started talking to the owner. We just have some chat. I was like, so how many people come for, where's the closest masjid? Oh, this is our main masjid. Okay. How many people come for Jummah? 200 sometimes. But you told me like 50,000 people moved here from Morocco and Syria and Lebanon and other places, and they all mixed with other families and they just kind of disappeared. They vanished. They assimilated. This is the reality. This is a reality. You know, the Europeans took a major risk. Listen to this carefully. The Europeans took a major risk sending their young men and women to get an education from the Muslims. You know what the risk was? When these people go study with the Muslims, they're going to end up becoming what? They're going to end up becoming Muslims. We're going to lose them. We're going to lose them. And they lost a lot of them. But some of them went into the lion's den. For them, the Muslim world was the lion's den, learned what they could learn, came back, and brought about what is now modern Europe. They took that risk because they got it back. The Muslims, you guys, many of you university students, are now in the heart of the West getting your education, right? And there's a pull on you to, and it's been there for a long time, to, you know, why aren't you like, speak American? Why don't you look American? And you know, I'm so grateful to Allah that I was raised, my high school life and my early adult life was in New York. Because nobody says that in New York. Why? Because it's the immigration capital of the world for a long time. Like, you know, there I used to work at a shoe store when I was in high school and college in a Puerto Rican neighborhood in Junction Boulevard. I used to work at a shoe store, right? And, you know, my Spanish used to be very, very good at the time. And one time this family came in and they needed some, and sometimes you learn things the hard way. So they're like, ¿Tienes pantalones de Levi? What? Pantalones de Levi. Levi. Oh, Levi's jeans. Okay, okay. Anyway, so they asked me for some shoe size for their kid or whatever, and I couldn't, they talked too fast. And so I said, no entiendo, I don't understand. And they're like, ¿Vives en los Estados Unidos? ¿No hablas español? They're like, you live in America? You don't speak Spanish? What's wrong with you? All right? This place is a melting pot. This place is a convergence of many, 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 many cultures, many languages, you know, many backgrounds, many religions. And Muslims here, just like Christianity, you know, they're figuring out Christianity. They're exploring Christianity. So there are more denominations of Christianity in America than anywhere else in the world. There's Episcopalian and this and that, and I can't even spell all of them, but and all of them have a different view on who Jesus is, right? And Muslims, after 9/11 especially, started thinking, I think we need to rethink Islam. I think there needs to be an American Islam. I think we need to have a new discussion about what Islam really means, and, you know, because, and a lot of that was, we need to fit in better, right? That was the generation 20 years, that was the conversation 20 years ago. But what about right now? What about, we are living in a pivotal moment right now. I'm absolutely convinced of this. I could be dead wrong, but from what I can see and what I've studied, and from what I can analyze with my limited ability and the discussions I've had with the sociologists, the political scientists, the analysts, the scholars, I'm coming to some crazy conclusions. I think the next 50 years that have initiated already, the next 50 years in this country, this could be the rise of Islam as a global ideology, a global belief system, entirely depending on Muslim youth in universities right now. And the battleground is the university campus. The battleground is young professionals that are in their office spaces. Why? Because you are, you know, this Philistine crisis, this genocide, you know what it's done? It's not just opened a political discussion. Because now part of that discussion is, why should we support Muslims? Because Islam is bad. And now you're forced to have an intelligent conversation about your religion. And you're going to be asked more aggressively, more questions about your faith, more questions about your loyalties, more questions about where you stand than ever before. And that's not just by the antagonists. There are people that are, as we're seeing, there are many good-hearted, sincere, decent human beings. Doesn't matter if they're Jewish, atheist, LGBTQ, doesn't matter what they are, something in them says this genocide is wrong. And they're speaking up. In fact, their voices are louder than ours. And those people, because they're speaking up for the Muslims, are also naturally developing questions about Islam. They have questions about Islam, and some of their, just like their assumptions about Palestine are being shattered, now they're like, maybe I've had assumptions about Islam too. Maybe I didn't know what this book is. I was just watching this guy on TikTok, some college student from Harvard, who's like, yeah, I did this challenge for myself. I was going to read the Quran in 24 hours. And I read it. Oh my God, this book's amazing. This guy's whole, you know. But he did that on his own. Nobody told him to do that. He just decided, hey, what's this book about, right? My urge to, especially the young people here is, this is where I come back to the Quran. The people that lived, the Israelites that lived among dominant societies, they tried to hide their religion, or change their appearance, or change their identity. And they tried to cut themselves off from the larger society, so the only way we can keep our Islam, the ones who wanted to keep Islam, they became sort of hermits that don't engage with the rest of society. And the ones who engaged with society blended into that society. You couldn't tell them apart. And you know what died in that process? Nobody was actually sharing what Allah actually says. Nobody was talking about what Allah actually says. This is the time for Muslim youth to become very serious about their Quran education. They need to know their book, and they need to know it very, very well. And the crisis in that department is that for a long time, for even the adult Muslims, forget about the young Muslims, even the adult Muslims were not given the right kind of opportunity to learn their book. We learn our book one ayah at a time. An ayah from here, 2 ayat from here, 3 ayat from there. You don't look at it as a book. You look at it as a reference. A reference manual is not the same as a book. A book is studied from one end to the other. A reference manual, you just open it for what you need and then you put it back. You don't go, you know, there's no need for you to go end to end. It's too much. I'm telling you what the Quran projects, the kind of thought process, the kind of mentality, the kind of confidence, the kind of worldview that the Quran wants from its believer will not happen if you have this like disjointed bits and piece reading of the Quran. You have to have a full reading of the Quran, a full meaningful engagement with the Quran. You know, and I'm doing that even now. It's not like I'm done. I'm still doing it. And one of the most amazing things that dawned on me, it's subhanAllah, this stuff is happening and I'm learning these things at the same time and it wasn't a part of the plan. You know what I discovered just in the last year that it didn't really hit me seriously about the Quran? That the Quran in its early revelations is particularly targeting 3 kinds of elites. The Quran is not targeting all disbelievers or all non-Muslims, not primarily. The primary target of the Quran in its early revelations were 3 kinds of elites: financial elites, political elites, and intellectual elites. 3 kinds. I'll explain that in a second. The financial elites were the very wealthy in Mecca who were hoarding their wealth, and it didn't matter if the orphans get crushed. They were the equivalent of multi-billion-dollar corporations that are okay with hundreds of thousands of patients dying in hospital beds because they can't reduce the price of their pill from, you know, $500 a pill to $4 a pill, even though it cost them 2 cents to make it. Right? That's the first group the Quran went after. Al-mutaffifin, alladhi yadu'u al-yatim, la yuhuddu ala ta'am al-miskin. Right? Manna'il lil-khayr. All over the Quran keeps coming after the rich that are using their wealth at the same, not only do they have wealth, they're making sure the poor stay poor. That's what they're, does that sound familiar in our time? Is that a relevant message in our time? And by the way, when you go after the mega rich, do you think they take it quietly? No. They make a call to the governor, who makes a call to the local police department, who then come out with their batons and their anti-riot gear to college campuses. That's the process. The Quran was asking for trouble by going after the financial elite. It questioned the financial elite. The second group it questioned was the political elite, who were corrupt because they were in bed with who? The financial elite. إِذَا أَمَرْنَا أَن نُهْلِكَ قَرْيَةً أَمَرْنَا مُتْرَ فِيهَا ففسقوا فيها. In another قراءة أمرنا مترفيها ففسقوا فيها. We make the financial elite, the financially frivolous, we give them political power. Allah says when Allah wants to destroy a nation, He takes its reckless billionaires and gives them political power. I didn't say it. Surah Al-Isra. Surah Al-Isra. Who would have imagined, could somebody tell you in 2020 or 2018 or 2016 or any other time in American history since the last 100 years, since, could somebody tell you there's going to be a riot on Capitol Hill? What are you talking about? This place brings stability to the rest of the world, man. We bring law and order. This is not the place where... One thing happened. The mutraf became amir. Yeah? And that's more visible. Like he's actually visibly a billionaire and also politically in power. But actually, the elites have always been in power. And that thin curtain is ripping off now very clearly. That's ripping off. And now we're seeing why the country is in the state that it's in. Right? So it comes after the politically corrupt. And actually even exposes their political tactics. All of their mind games, all of their media strategies, all of them are documented in the Quran. All of them. There's not one that I didn't find. Look at Surah Al-Qalam, look at Surah Al-Haqqa, you'll find it easily. The third group, what did I say? Let's see if you were paying attention. The intelligentsia. And the intelligent elite of the time were actually the rabbis. They were considered the smart people in the region. Even the Arabs who were pagans, sometimes they would take their questions to the rabbis. And many pre-Islamic Arab tribes were influenced in some way or the other by Jewish traditions. They had made their way into the Jewish traditions. This was the case of Arabia at the time. And the Quran did not go after converting some Jews or converting some Christians. The Quran went after the priests. The Quran went after the rabbis. It didn't ask for just some regular Christian who doesn't know much about Christianity. It's not trying to confuse him. Allah wants to bring the people that have been studying the book, the Ahlul Kitab. Ahlul Kitab is not bad translation, people of the book. Ahl comes from mu'ahal, qualified, la'iq. Ya Ahlul Kitab, when you see Ahlul Kitab in the Quran, is different from alladhina utul kitab. Those who were given the book. Those who were given the book is the Christian and Jewish civilization. The Ahlul Kitab are the people that are qualified, credentialed, scholarly in their books. And they're the ones, وَأَنْتُمْ تَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابِ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ لِمَ تَصُدُّونَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ مَنْ آمَنَ تَبْغُونَهَا عِوَجًا وَأَنْتُمْ تَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابِ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. He's going after the scholars. Umar bin al-Khattab radiallahu anhu is reported to have walked into a synagogue or a seminary of rabbis and started reciting Quran to them and said, "What do you say about this?" He did this. I had not an Umar bin al-Khattab experience. I'm not there yet. But I did have some fun conversations with rabbis. Because the Quran describes that they were supposed to make sajda too. Ruku' and sajda. Right? And they don't make sajda. If you've seen Jewish worship, it's half a ruku', but it's no sajda. Right? And I asked them, well, you don't do it anymore, what's up? Like it's in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament, so why don't you do it? He goes, yeah, we should have done it, but we have a festival every year where we mourn not doing it. Like, I'm so sad that I don't do it. I feel your pain. But you know what? What I want from the young Muslims here, I need you to understand your tradition. I definitely need you to understand Christianity and Judaism and the Quran in the backdrop of Christianity and Judaism. The Quran is not a new religion. The Quran is picking up from where Musa and Isa left off. Musa alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam gave revelation to the Israelites, and the Quran came and said, it's going to restore the original teachings, not replace them, restore them, and to remove all of the corruptions that were added therein. And if you don't understand this, and by the way, if you do understand this, it will revolutionize the way you have conversations on campus, especially with people that are hardline right-wingers or this is what's supposed to happen. It's in the Bible. That's what God said. That's just what's supposed to happen. What do you want me to do? They're chosen people, right? So you can have very intelligent conversations with them without being offensive. You can learn how the Quran responds to their traditions. Particularly important. I would give you a homework assignment if I could. This year, you need to have finished a study of Baqarah and Ali Imran in depth. At least Baqarah and Ali Imran in depth. Why? Because you Muslims can no longer afford to have a strong sense of identity. We can't. And you will not. Nothing will give you a strong sense of identity like the Quran will. If you think attending the masjid will give you a sense of identity, that's a social identity. If being from a Muslim family, that's a genealogical identity. That's not a spiritual identity. It's either a social identity or a genealogical identity. If you're just hanging out with your Muslim friends, or you're attending, or you follow a bunch of Islamic stuff on TikTok, and you get like a 30-second motivation, right? You know what's going to happen in Jannah? You're like, okay, I'm motivated. I'm back on Islam again. Okay, I'm motivated. You know what that is? That's a dopamine hit. That's not your faith. That's just a little bit of a feel-good moment. Don't confuse that with an education. Don't confuse that with an education. When you take any education seriously, you don't get it in 30-second bites, do you? You don't get it in 2-minute bites. You're not going to learn medicine. Here's surgery, just a little bit. I'm ready. Won't do it. This is in fact our identity. And so two or three educations that I think have become absolutely vital for Muslim youth is the Quran, its early history of Islam, and the last 300 years. What got us here? What got us, we need to understand how we ended up in the world that we're in now. When you have that, you are more intelligent than most in the world. Just that. You're smarter than most people in the room. And you're able to have a more grounded conversation than anybody else. You can put things in context. You can put things in its proper place. You can come across as the reasonable people. What's the branding of Muslims? They're rational, erratic, extremist, uncivilized, etc., etc. The only way to shatter that is not saying, no, we're not. That's not the way you break that impression. The way you break that impression is by your education. By what comes out of your mouth when you face that kind of ignorance. I'm going to leave you with this thought. I was studying Surah Al-Qalam a couple of months ago, and the opening of Surah Al-Qalam is one of the most mind-blowing things I've ever read in my life. You wouldn't think it. Noon wal qalami wa ma yasturun. Okay? Allah says Noon. Only Allah knows what that means. I swear by the pen, and I swear by what they are writing and what they will keep on writing. Our scholars said this must be the angels writing and they'll keep on writing. But Allah didn't specify angels, did He? Others said no, this is going to be writing itself. The Muslims will eventually be writing the Quran because it wasn't in writing at first. What are they going to keep on writing? But you know what? The Quran came, and the first response to the Quran was, he's insane. Poor guy lost his mind. And Allah says, I swear by what they write, I swear by the pen and what they will keep on writing, you're not insane at all. You're not insane at all. You know what Allah is telling us? Allah is telling us that until Judgment Day, people will they will pick up the pen and they will write about what was brought to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and an intellectual revolution will keep on coming to the world because of the revelation given to this man. And in this little town in Arabia, some people with big inflated egos have the audacity to call him insane, but the future of the entire world and the shaping of the map of the world will be determined by this book. And wasn't it? Wasn't it? And more books were spawned, and more universities were spawned, and more sciences were initiated by the inspiration that came from what? From this book. The revolutions in medicine, engineering, infrastructure, trade, revolutions across the the spectrum of human inquiry, inspired by people that learn something from the book. And by the way, you go to a society where 99% of the people can't read or write, and one of the first things you tell them is, I swear by the pen. They're like, pen? You got a pen? What's a pen? Writing? Isn't that for like the Roman Empire? They write. I think the Chinese Empire writes. The Persians, we don't write. I mean, we got a couple of poets, I think they write down their bars. Other than, who writes? I think the rabbis write. Writing was a scarcity, wasn't it? And the Quran, since it came, one of the first things it said is it's not only a revolution in faith, it's a revolution in education. It's a revolution in education. Some of you know a little bit of history, maybe more than me even. You know that the church did not allow any average Christian to pick up the Bible and read it. You had to have special access to read it. The scrolls of the Torah were kept in possession of the rabbis and the priests, and you couldn't just go pick up a Torah and just read it for yourself. You had to have special access. You know, like the original copy of the Constitution kept behind tempered glass and temperature controlled and all that stuff, and you have to have special permission to be able to even put those special gloves on and touch it. That's how they treated the Bible, and even a copy of the Bible. That's how they treated sacred literature. The Quran came, which is claiming to be the Word of God, and for the first time, access to the Word of God is democratized. Anybody, forget believer. A believer can read it, a disbeliever can read it, a Jew can read it, a Christian can read it, a Hindu can read it, the scholar can read it, the ignorant can, the farmer can, everybody can read it. And who can discuss it? Nobody? Who can ask questions about it? Everybody. Even in the education of religion, the Quran represented a revolution. Even in the education of religion. It's something that never happened before in the history of the world. There was always a priestly class, a sacred, holy class. They have access to God. You need to go to them to have access to God. You don't get that yourself. Quran removed that and said, no, direct access. Direct access. And for everyone who will educate themselves, there's a reward for the Prophet ﷺ. I'll tell you, just the depth of the Quran blows your mind. I'll tell you one more thing about it, because it's in my head. I gotta get it out. Otherwise, I'll feel like I didn't. It's like the baby when he has to burp and he can't. Right? Do you know why there was limited access to the Bible? What the whole machinery was? The king has a deal with the church. The church will go every Sunday and tell the people that gather that the king has been appointed by God himself. The king is God's blessing on earth. And you giving alms to the king is you doing an act of worship to God. And when they do that, the king says, good job, church, here's your cut. Here's your 20%. And the church is making money. And why are they making money? Because they have a contract deal with the king. The government and religion have a cooperative agreement to together suck the blood of humanity. That's the deal. And this deal worked in ancient Egypt between the priests and the pharaohs. This deal worked in the Catholic Church. This was the same deal that the rabbis had with the Romans. This deal has been around. This is the formula that works. It's a really, really effective formula, right? Because now people paying their taxes or paying, and you'll find, by the way, in America, you'll find there's a really cool church in Cincinnati that has a giant Jesus outside, right? And they'll always have an American flag on the side too. Like, oh, okay, yeah, government church, yeah. Seen that before, Or God help our troops. Okay, so the God of the Bible should help your troops when they are pillaging villages in Vietnam. That's the God of the Bible? No, that's the God sanctioned by the government. That's not the God of the Bible. You understand? The Quran comes along. By the way, this is a money scheme, isn't it? This is a money scheme. And if you did a little bit of digging into the financial workings of even the evangelical church and their relationship with right-wing parties, right? And how they kind of, help each other. If you listen to Christian radio, I listen to it sometimes because I need to melt some brain cells. So I listen to Christian radio sometimes, or faith-based political talk radio. And how they're talking about voting for a certain candidate is the mandate of Jesus. That's what the Lord wants you to do. This is exactly what was going on in the church for centuries. And now it's on FM radio. It's the same formula. But behind all of it is what? Behind all of it is money. The actual God is money in both these cases. The Prophet ﷺ is told this is going to be a revolution in education. Everybody will have direct access. The question becomes, how are we going to make money? Because church leaders, religious leaders, are in it for big bucks. What kind of religious leader is this? How's he going to get his money? And Allah says, وَإِنَّ لَكَ لَأَجْرًا غَيْرَ مَمْنُونَ. You will have a compensation that will never come to an end. Your compensation is with Allah. You don't need it from the people. You don't need to set up this corrupt machinery. You don't have to fall into this scheme, this trap. And by the way, because he was gaining popularity, because Islam is a religion, it's gaining popularity in Makkah. When it's gaining popularity, who's going to come to the Prophet? What a surprise. Politicians. And they came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, let's cut a deal. وَدُّوا لَوْ تُدْهِنُوا فَيُدْهِنُونَ. The entire history of corrupt religion and government captured in a handful of ayat. And are those ayat relevant today is my question. Are we living those ayat in front of us? We're living those ayat in front of us. So when I'm not just giving you hot air. You guys need to study the Quran beginning to end because it will change your worldview. Are you starting to see what I'm saying? Are you seeing what we're missing? Something. We're missing the divine lens. Allah cuts through the nonsense. He cuts through the nonsense. He doesn't want a faithful believer that shuns the world away and goes in the corner in a mihrab and is just making dua and is quiet. No. That's part of your day. That's at nighttime when you worship Allah. Yeah. But inna laka fin nahari sabhan tawila. In the daytime you have a tough job to do. You got to engage with the outside world. You got to deal with the reality, the ugly reality that's in front of us. This generation will determine whether millions of young Americans that are now going through this phase right now, whether or not millions of Americans will accept Islam. Millions of Americans. No hard proselytization, no conversions, no please accept Islam, I challenge you, none of that. Just you intelligently representing your deen. Just you not being ashamed of carrying your faith. Just that will be bigger than any da'wah convention, any da'wah campaign, any debate platform. You won't even need a debate. You know what's going to speak for you that'll be so dangerous? First of all, the Quran speaks for itself. It doesn't need you to speak for it. Once you start, our job is to make it known. Our job is to allow it to be heard. That's our job, right? What it does to the person on the other end, that's between them and Allah. That's not your job. But you know what's going to speak loudly for America? What spoke loudly for the Prophet ﷺ? This is the last, I promise this is the last thing. How do politicians convince their audiences? How do they gain their loyalty? I'll give you a clue. Promises. A lot of running of the mouth. You know what Allah calls that? وَلَا تُطِعْ كُلَّ حَلَّافٍ مَهِينٍ. Don't follow someone who makes big promises and oaths and is weak in principle. That's a chilling description. Very big rhetorically, great powerful speaker that can charge up a crowd, make huge promises, but behind those promises are no principles. Mahin is someone weak in principles. Allah says, don't follow such a person. In that comment, Allah has given us a synopsis of what politics is about. It's theater. But what's on the other side? There's the corrupt politics and corrupt religion. On the other side is the Quran, right? What's the Quran? What does Allah say about the Prophet ﷺ? He says, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You stand on great character. Your character speaks for you. They have to make oaths and speeches, and they have to convince and rally their crowds, And on the other hand, even if he doesn't open his mouth, it doesn't make any promises, what speaks for him? The way he's been doing business, the way he's been dealing with people, the way he's been interacting with society, where he stands. You Muslim kids are dangerous if they hold on to their faith. Their presence is dangerous. Their presence has people around you, your friends around you. I'm getting some like spiritual energy, bro. There's a vibe, like I need to do a vibe check on this. You're giving faith. You're giving honesty. Something is going to change. It's either that or these same Muslim students will become afraid. Because you guys have a tougher road ahead of you than my generation. Two decades ago, being Muslim in America was much easier. Even though at the time we were crying, oh, Islam in America is so hard, so hard. No, it wasn't. Even after 9/11, Islam in America wasn't this hard. Islam in America is hard now. It's hard now. Allah chose you to be university students, high schoolers, young professionals now. Which means Allah sees something in you that He didn't see in my generation or the decade after. He saw it in you. You are up for this challenge. That's my message to you guys. You know, it's either we shoot up or we cease to exist. You know, those who destroyed and pillaged and killed the Israelites, those who engaged in violence against the Israelites, like the Babylonians, like the Assyrians in Jewish history, which was part of the punishment Allah gave them. You know, that was at a time where they were trying to assimilate in those societies anyway. They weren't even living up to their own values. And they got hated on for being Jewish anyway. In other words, the ones who hate you will hate you no matter what. Might as well be who you are. They're going to persecute you anyway. So why are you trying to be like, why are you accepting this false premise of supremacy? I love, one thing, I'm so grateful to Allah that He gave me the opportunity to grow up in this country. I don't think I could have done what I do if I wasn't in America. In its bones, in this country, Allah put something that can bring khair to the entire world. It has the ability to spread, whatever it produces, it can spread all over the world. If it produces a baseball hat, you see baseball hats in China. If it produces jeans, you'll see jeans in, Sri Lanka. If it produces rock music, you'll have, Swahili rock music. There's something Allah put in this country. It has the ability to just export. And it just gets universal acceptance. It's crazy. Even our Islamic speakers, just because they're American, get way more acceptance all over the world than anybody else. Isn't that crazy? You know what that is? This has been for a long, and it may not be forever, because no nation lasts forever that way, but this has been the cultural capital of the world for a long time. This has been the cultural capital of the world. My in-laws, my wife's family, they live in Denmark, and the Danish, their biggest dream is to sound American. I was in Kosovo, and Kosovo has a history with America because Bill Clinton stopped the genocide from happening, right? And set up, and they paid a price for it. Now they have the biggest American base in Europe, in Kosovo, right? But anyway, the Muslims, but they love America. You turn on the radio, or you get in a taxi in Kosovo, it's American radio. It's American radio. You go to Pakistan, Pakistani kids trying to sound American. They can't do it, but they try. Yar burger khana, yar bahut bhook. That's not how you talk, bro. Just don't do it. It hurts. You're gonna have to end up at the dentist office. Like, don't do it. But you know why I'm saying that? Because Allah put believers in this land in large number, and He gave us more opportunity than He gave the Europeans, more opportunity than He gave the Australians. I've seen it. More opportunity than He gave the Canadians. Muslims are thriving here as a minority more than any other place on earth. I checked myself. I went. I can say that with confidence. We have mega Islamic centers. We have thousands of people attending our Jummah Salah. We have university students openly demonstrating, displaying their Islam and thriving professionally in businesses. We are embedded in virtually every part of society. We have been blessed more than most of the ummah. Well, that's not alhamdulillah for me. That's an astaghfirullah for me, because when Allah gives you more, He expects more. And if He puts you in a place that impacts the entire world, then you can't be sitting there thinking about our little community. You need to have a global outlook. You need to be thinking bigger. You need to act, if you really want to be American, that's one of the American things to do. You need to be an exporter. You need to have concern. If you are from Lebanese origin, you need to be thinking about the Lebanese youth all the time. In Lebanon too. Not just here. If you're from Bangladesh, you should be thinking about the Bengalis. If you're from Pakistan, you should be thinking about the Pakistanis. Absolutely you should be. And the youth, I know I've given you lots of homework assignments, but man, one last one, you better learn that Arabic. And I'm not just saying that I'm saying it of course for spiritual reasons. You need to have a direct contact with the Quran. But there's another reason. Identity is directly tied to language. The moment you lose language, what goes with it? Identity goes with it. Culture goes with it, identity goes with it, a self of belonging goes with it. The language you are most comfortable with and the language that you acquire for yourself is the language of your identity. So when our kids, the Pakistani people, their kids understand Urdu but respond in English. The Arabs, their kids understand some Arabic but respond in English. Or they mix it together, right? I heard one family say, Mama. And the mom said, you know, how come you didn't come back? Oh, shupt. I was like, shupt? That Arabic? Shuptu? Oh, I shopped. Shuptu. Right? But if we are to restore the Muslim civilization and the intellectual heritage of Islam, not just the spiritual heritage, but on top of that, the intellectual heritage of Islam, we have to not just maintain, we have to up the bar on the languages of the Muslims. Starting with Arabic. Arabic is our common denominator. Everybody should excel in Arabic. Just like those people who told me in Queens, you live in America, you don't speak Spanish. Same way. You're Muslim, you didn't take the time to learn Arabic. Who says you don't have the opportunity, the time, the skill, the intelligence? You can learn programming languages. You're learning AI tools. You're learning video editing. You're learning all kinds of. You learn the language of medicine. You can't learn Arabic? Please, oh, it's so hard. Shut up. You're too smart to say that. You know your SAT scores. You're too smart to say that. Don't act dumb. Learn it. Excel in it. Excel in it. Develop that as your heritage. You know, one of the first things the Israelis did after forming their state, mandated the learning of Hebrew. Restoring the Hebrew language from scratch. Mandated it. That almost fanatical sense of identity, part of that they knew comes from where? From language. It comes from language. My son, my wife is from Afghanistan, and Hadid, our baby. I speak Urdu. She speaks Farsi. I'm learning Farsi from her and my in-laws. I'm decent. That boy, I'm going to make sure he's reading, writing, and speaking Urdu like a boss. And Farsi. And Arabic. English is going to happen anyway. But I don't just want him to know English. I want him to be eloquent. I want him to be eloquent. I want him to be able to stand toe-to-toe with a literature professor in Oxford. My first concern for him is language education, because language gives you access to higher thinking. It gives you access to civilization and heritage. I know I've said a lot of things, but I just wanted to drop some of these nuggets on you so you have something to think about, something really seriously to think about. And I make so much dua, especially for our youth, that are, whether we realize it or not, they are living in an ideological battlefield. May Allah Azza wa Jal protect them in this battle that they're in. May Allah preserve their faith and strengthen their faith and build their confidence. And may Allah make them the reason that the entire ummah reconnects with the Quran like it hasn't for centuries. Barakallahu li wa lakum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.